music, kind of songwriting and poetry are kind of similar in that sense. And that's kind of how I felt like it was easier to process emotions and write about things through like these free verse. And I think from the moment that I realized that poetry didn't need to be this rigid sort of like put into boxes, rhyming, that type of stuff, I think it became easier for me to give it a try, I guess. And yeah, I started writing poetry kind of more in an intuitive way. I had no idea what I was doing, and sending it off to publications, which surprisingly it worked. And from that point on, a friend of mine gave me the idea of just putting them into a collection. That was for my first book. And from that point on, I realized that there was a cohesive theme throughout these whole like, forms. For my second collection, this was more intentional. I kind of knew what I wanted to write about, and it came together in that way, much more cohesively. Like I knew that I wanted to talk about certain things and certain themes. And that's kind of how it came together.
Amazing. And so I'm curious too about as a polylingual person and multicultural from a multicultural background, when it comes to writing poetry, specifically in the English language, how do you think your multicultural background and multilinguistic background kind of influences the way that you write or even the way that you think about writing?
That's a good question. So my background, so I'm like French speaking as well as English speaking, and in France, it's much more like there are a lot of rules and a lot of like structure, and so I guess that was kind of why poetry was so terrifying to me, because the way we learned it in school, it was very much these very specific kind of guidelines as to how it needs to be. And so I feel like the English language gave me more freedom to just sort of make up words and mix things together and do whatever. But I do add a little bit of different languages in, and that's what makes these languages are scary.
I love that. I love the sort of invention and reinvention that you talk about with regards to your work. And I wonder how much of that is deeply personal and kind of related to your own and maybe constant invention and reinvention, and how much it is something that you observe through the lens of the life that you've lived so far. If you can talk about that a little bit.
I think a bit of both, but especially I think it came from a personal, like not feeling like you belong in one place makes it that you kind of look for also this liminal in between, not very defined spaces, and that's kind of what I did with a lot of what I write. It's just leaning into this element of I'm not sure what this is, and this is not there's a definition for this, and I kind of lean into that, like the vagueness, and somehow I found a voice while doing that.
I love it so much. And I love what you just said about liminal space, because I think, this is my opinion, of course, but I think that poetry is definitely sort of the language of liminal spaces in a lot of ways. And I wonder if you can kind of dig a little bit more into the concept of the liminal space and how it kind of fits into Burn the Witch, which I also want to talk about the title in that, because that's a hugely powerful image as well. In Burn the Witch, how liminal spaces are injected or part of the mentality that you have in writing.
I think a lot of it came from just a space of questioning, and like I said, I knew what I was writing. It was very much intentional this time around, but at the same time, I kind of went in there with this no holds bar kind of attitude to it. I had no idea what I was doing a lot of the time, but I just knew that it was led by feeling, and that feeling itself was at times kind of undefined, and that's what for once, like I decided to go with that rather than go with what makes sense, what has a beginning, what hasn't. And even though a lot of the poems in this collection were led by questions and by memories and by very specific things, I still didn't let that anchor it. I wanted it to stay in this floating space. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that really does make sense. and I kind of want to reflect on that a little bit, circle back to it. But speaking of the works, the poems themselves, did you, as you were writing them, or as you were compiling this book, did you think, oh, this is the book I want to write, let me write some poems for it, or was it, oh, I now see a through line in several poems that I have written, and they all make sense together. This is that word.
I think it would more be the second part. It's like a lot of it came from a place of anger. It was I wrote a lot of these poems in like 2020 when the pandemic happened, but the poems I feel like were already inside me. I just didn't know how to give them voice. There's a lot of anger and a lot of like feelings of injustice. There's a lot of just revolt, I guess, is the way to put it. And I was writing a lot, not just poems, just like nonfiction, essays, and everything. Then I just sat down one day and realized I have about like 60 poems here, and they all kind of have something in common, and that's how I decided to put them. And some of the poems that I wrote, I didn't end up including them in this poem, but I realized that there was a through line throughout this whole body of work. Yeah.
It's amazing, really, how that happens, and how, especially, you know, as you are aware, in 2020, especially, you know, the pandemic was a time period where a lot of bubbles were being burst, a lot of illusions were being dropped for folks, and in 2020, with, you know, especially the racial justice uprisings and the work that people were doing in that regard, do you feel that that sort of the spread of energy that was kind of bubbling up throughout different communities, interconnected communities, also made its way into these works? Speaking of, you know, from a place of anger, for example, also, but also all of the other elements that were part of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that for me, like I said, I wrote the first collection. It was a lot of like nostalgia and like navel gazing, and not in a bad way, but it was a lot of like thinking about my childhood and thinking about. And so for this one, it was very much rooted in the present. I didn't realize I was doing it, but I was reacting a lot to what was going on around. And I wrote a lot of poems about, you know, being Black and being in this country and not kind of feeling like you belong, which is basically the whole premise of this collection. Feeling of belonging and what it meant, that was definitely reintroduced to me, because I felt like I already knew I had this feeling of I don't know where I belong. I kind of come from all these different places. But then with this protest and the pandemic and everything going on, it was definitely, even for me, I thought I was like, I had my eyes open. It opened my eyes open. And that definitely made its way in this collection.
So that kind of leads me back around to the talk about liminal spaces from earlier too, right? Because this past couple of years, honestly, has been its own very limbo, very liminal space for a lot of folks. But at the same time, I think that as an artist, as a writer, as a citizen of the world of any kind, you end up in a space like that. It gives you the opportunity to open up parts of your psyche, about in your community, and your inner work as well as your external work that may be in the hustle and bustle of good old capitalism. You know, it's really hard to access those things. So when we're talking about Burn the Witch and the anger, the transformation of these poems, I'm curious about how you see these works, this book of poems, but also these individual poems. How do you see them kind of living on into the next sort of era? You know, people say the pandemic is over. There are all kinds of shifts and changes happening in the United States, especially, but also globally. How do you see these reflections that are in these poems living on as the times change as well?
Well, I wrote a lot of them, like I said, based on, or it was spurred by a lot of what was going on. But the questions themselves that I was asking are more like general, universal ones of what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to owe things to other people and to be owed things? And what does it mean to exist? I guess are things that are important when we're talking about like the things that were going on in 2020, but I feel like they would be asked anyways. It's questions that I've always asked myself and things that I was always thinking of, but I guess they existed at a specific time and like I said, was rooted in the present, but I feel like that present kind of has not ended in that sense, at least for me. The questions that I asked myself were very rooted in things that are still going on, things that are still happening with alienation and not feeling like you belong places.
I think that makes a lot of sense because when you reach a point where you're asking yourself these really complex and deep questions, it kind of rebounds through you, and there might not be an answer at the end of that reverberation. It's just an ongoing question, and the journey is part of like looking for that answer, regardless of whether or not it might materially exist, right? So I think that's if you like now to perhaps read the book, we can talk about some of the poems.
I've got a few here. So this first poem is called The Mistress of Talking in Circles. There's nothing worse than soggy ramen, I replied, and you took it as evidence of my characteristic flippancy. Had you let me finish, I'd have continued my analogy. There's nothing worse than good things left to stew until they pickle into ghosts of themselves. As in, I the soup, you the ramen, I will ruin you if you say and all that noise. So there, it's on the nose, it's not my best metaphor, but one you'd have understood had you been less hungry. Once you called me the mistress of talking in circles, and though I chuckled, I have OCD, you bastard. It was so as not to wail. My bad. I've been called punctilious, easily distracted by minutia. Chasing tails like blood sport. You've made yourself dizzy at night. When you told me you were leaving, you said, it's for my best. I counted, happy for you, weighing and appraising all the future hurts, hands clasped, going double file down your narrow feet. Another thing you once told me, I have sometimes a mean way of saying it. With a laugh. Sort that makes folk wish they never implored me to speak up. Look on with me. These innovations, they rarely get an out. So when they do, mad dash, slap dash, toes stumbling on toes, gracelessness grounds the apology. I forget the adequate cry, the suitable words of atonement. I ain't shit. Want nothing more than to plead, I beg you, and no. But I just laugh and laugh and say. Sure, give me a second. So this one is called Never Was Your Fault. It was a mistake after all to make the kitchen brighter. All colors are known to lie, to prettify themselves for the occasion. I draw my knees up on the granite floor, up against the window glass and have conversations with the peach swiped yellow wallpaper. I feign honesty. I am a woman who can talk about grief and write out that watercolored sadness I always brush my toes in. I swear I'm a woman who can look a curving road in the eye and say, I know where this is going. I am a woman, I have been here before. I can hold it together, come up against the freshly wallpapered kitchen, can say, this is a mistake. No, don't think wallpaper, don't think yellow, don't think about that story, you know the one. I'm a woman who can say, no, you are not like that. Protagonist with her sad life and almost me. Things come and go, times in Niagara, checking in occasionally. You still there then? Green tea mug gets cold in hand. Petrichor gives way to a sea breeze kind of smell. Light makes its mad dash way across the room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock. My outline shrinks and flickers before me. For a few hours, I'm a giant in front of you, but yellow walls and I will go nowhere. I'm a woman who can hold it together, hold it together, hold it together. I need to learn things other than with my hands that aren't picking and picking and picking apart. I heard dying felt like a flash, a burst, life bottlenecked into a last huzzah. Somebody told me it's a bend in the road you should outpace before it finds you unawares. I'm lying. I know dying feels like a flash, a burst, like bottleneck, and nobody told me. This I did. anything but the sole exercise of where was the stone? It was a mistake to make the wallpaper yellow. Now my hands are full of it. The allegorical mistake laid out like an exclamation on my fingers. I'm a woman who can look at curving, bending mind and say, you know where this is going. Go to bed. You can already hear the roar. You've had too good a couple of weeks. And yellow, like that damn story, will pull you apart. Never was your help. Next time, go at least for red.
I definitely want to have you read a few more as well, but yeah, let's talk about these two selections and how they really embody what you were talking about with the sort of cyclical deep self-reflection, right? And I'm curious about, as you're writing these poems, are they sort of journalistic more, or are they more pulling from different experiences and different encounters and folding into a holistic representation of like, the idea of an experience? I know it's really a bit of a word salad.
No, I get you. Well, these poems are actually representative of two different kinds of way that I write. The first one was pulled from a memory of a conversation that I was having with someone, and it's something that at the time I was like, okay, we've dealt with, okay, but it's something that I kept thinking of, and I think the spirit of reflection in which I wrote this book was a lot of just thinking of things that I thought I had dealt with but had not dealt with, including relationships that fall apart and things that don't get dealt with. The second one was more, I guess, like images and impressions. And I found a way to channel that into words while I was reading that The Yellow Wallpaper. And it just really struck me that there's a lot there that every time I read that story, it brought back some feelings of similar desperation and similar types of, I guess, feeling untethered is the way I would put it.
So then speaking of the different ways of how you write the poems, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier about kind of breaking the form or breaking form in general and reinventing and not feeling constrained to, I guess, what are the maybe accepted formats or types of language or ways of using language. And I'm curious about how you kind of arrived at those practices as a writer, and also if you had to kind of unlearn some of the restrictive practices or methodologies of writing.
I definitely had to unlearn a lot of, like, this is the way things are supposed to be. As I was doing it, it felt like I could write a good poem while following those rules, but then I would feel like this wasn't really me. To find that I had to sort of go against, like, I guess where it feels dangerous, just go there. And that's kind of what I did a lot of, going against the instinct that was like ingrained in me. It's in doing that I found that I was feeling actually more inspired, felt more freedom, and I felt like I was tapping into parts of like my brain that I hadn't known existed in that sense.
I love that so much, and I think that pairs beautifully with the idea of poetry as resistance. You know, poetry inspired by a resistance mindset and a revolutionary mindset. Because especially, you know, as we all hopefully know, right, the literary teachings in the Western world are very focused on a really narrow experience. And so to break form and to defy those strictures and find something deeper in the work that represents the way that you're thinking, that you're feeling, is in itself like a revolutionary act as a writer. You'd like to with the next two poems?
So this one's called In Slow Burn Passion. We had 3 good months, but fires too seldom tended to, as the saying goes, take to running out. It burned your skin and you pretended that it didn't. It burned me too. You took it well, if not stoically, but later it devastated you in waves. I pretended not to take it all, and it came back with a vengeance. At the time you were sober, much less gone behind the eyes. I picture you fingering a guitar you cannot play, pretending you're not humoring the joke of alcoholism, bubbled, budding like water petals on your lips. The sugar hazel of your eyes colored by the stain the saddest you. I think by the time I met you, I already knew how to do this, how to lose a friend and pretend they liked you, how to lose a person, a country, a body, a life, and pretend they liked you. I took one look and I said, I'm going to lose this man and do it gladly. These days, the singeing, grinding copper fist, it digs a couple out in my chest every time. And I think, yes, this is good. This is better than the decades-long pretenders, because regret, it has brought me to my knees laughing. Not the impish kind that made me leave the city for another. The disorienting kind, the humbling kind, the kind that makes you consider hands going, wait a minute, now wait, just wait, until you get it, really get it. But I've said this already, half out of love, half just for the heck of it, there's no way to live. And this last one is called Shiny Joy. It happened one day as you were walking down Wabash Avenue, fresh from Montreal, that careless woman who broke in your heart a little more each year. You sometimes blame that city, but if you were honest with yourself, you would admit it wasn't her. It was the weight of what you expected she could fix. Nobody could fix that. Again, if you were being honest, which is not likely to happen. It happened then as you were exploring your new lover, inhaling the windswept novelty of Chicago, a new place in the country you hadn't returned to in years. Easy to forget how you escaped with taunting words over your shoulder, like you've done to city after city after city, whacking pleading hands and cajoling vows aside. You have seen the last of me, you ungrateful witch. Though you have shown me a friend who picked up the stab with restless fingers until you were once again an outsider. When you tore into that of Montreal, you vaulted over your old flame Maryland's and skedaddled straight west until Lake Michigan caught you with a wink and a thumb to their finger. It happened then as you sauntered down Wabash Avenue. And I'm not. Oh, yeah. This thing, but you see, this thing was monumental in its smallness, next to those other two colossal things, and I've been trying to put it into words. The petaled city is slowly effortless around them. A person smiled, another nodded, a third one opened the door. The sound of water harmonized with foreign storage jets. You eased. Hadn't felt that in too long, eyes always trained inward or down as you sauntered down streets, because being a walking woman, it is hard. Being a black one, harder, depending on where you are casting the die. Chicago grinned slowly, beckoned, and you went. And not that you stayed infatuated for long, and not that things have changed overnight, and your city loves are less scary, and not that you will ever understand the concept of home, and not that this country hates you any less. So you always wait for the sign, the one that says, even for a second, come closer, let's dance, try and see if you can pick up. You were seen, it was nice. Sometimes you just want to write something down because it's
I am in love with the voice in your in these works that you just read. It has so much intimacy, but also this sort of almost a fisheye lens that kind of captures a halo of surrounding emotions and experiences as well. And I wonder if you have some words on how you kind of managed to balance that duality of the hyper focused feeling of specificity while at the same time you're also writing about a very accessible and broad feeling that many people, both similar and dissimilar to you in terms of your social milieu, can relate to. If you have anything to say about that balance.
I think the tendency for me is kind of to go into the very confessional, very personal, but then I always ask myself, what does this mean in general? Can anybody else relate to this? I feel like the poem is never finished until I can kind of open it up to a more broad sort of lens. And so I always go from the personal, and then I kind of stay there, and sometimes I sleep on a phone for a day or two, and then later on I find that why am I writing this? And I guess that's kind of the question, like, why am I writing this? Why does this matter? And why would anybody care picking up this book to read this very specific experience that I'm talking about?
Do you ever think, do you ever surprise yourself by, when you sleep on a poem, for example, or when you kind of, you start from within and work your way outwards, do you ever surprise yourself by finding, whether it be interpersonal or societal elements that are relevant to the work, or you know what I'm trying to say? Like, do you ever surprise yourself, like, oh, this is about this? I didn't even know.
Definitely, for sure. I've sometimes written a poem that I thought was about one thing, and then I kept feeling it pulling me in another direction, only to realize, oh, this is what I want to write initially. And I don't always sleep on it. Sometimes I write them in one sitting, but when I do, I find that I have more of a access to what I'm trying to say, which is usually always bigger than.
On that note, what's maybe the longest period of time that you've worked with a poem and that's sort of transformed it over time? Kind of, where did it start and then where did it end up?
The longest I've worked on a poem is definitely probably like a month. Yeah. In the sense that I was writing it and I didn't want to let it go, even though I felt like it wasn't going where I wanted it to be. I don't try to make them go in a certain direction because then I feel like I'm editing way too much. Whereas poetry is probably the thing I edit the least when I write it. It's the thing that I let it come out of me the way it is, pretty much raw, even if sometimes the sentences don't make sense. So the longest I've worked on a poem was because I had something I wanted to say, and I felt like it wasn't getting there. And I slept on it, and I kept sleeping on it, and I kept sleeping on it. Did that for basically a whole month. But by the end of it, it was just a matter of like a word or two. Everything good.
Of course, there's just like that one little key, that's puzzle piece.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And that's because, for the most part, poetry is an art form using the great economy of words. Mm-hmm. So the precision is so important. And one thing about your poems that really stands out to me is that your word choices are very particular. And I think it's something that helps to drive home that sense of a very precise meaning. Because if you're talking about the color yellow, that's one thing. If you say ochre, that gives a very specific mood. Right. Or so I'm curious about, since you just mentioned, it was a matter of a word or two, about your kind of relationships with words in general. Like how do I phrase this better? How are you as a reader of words, or as a holder of words, just as objects themselves for use and manipulation in your writing?
Yeah, I'm a word nerd. I just love words, and I have a whole document just with words that I find while I'm reading and that I think are beautiful or evocative, and I actually wrote a poem about writing words. So I think I like that words have a very locked-in meaning, but speaking different languages also taught me that sometimes a word can mean completely different things in a different language, and sometimes don't have a very fixed sort of status. And I think that's what I like about them. They can mean whatever you want. Some words are like really charged and full of meaning, and others can basically become what you want them to be.
I think that's I mean, I personally spend a lot of time on etymology online.
Exactly.
Just like digging into
I've done that.
Yeah, I love to do it. And I'm curious too, going back to the multilingual aspect, and how I also speak French, not very well. Don't spread that news. Don't quote me on that. But just knowing the etymology of a word, even that you have the dictionary definition, and then you take a look at the etymology, and that can transform how you use it. For example, an example that comes to mind is the etymology of the word family. You describe the definition of a family. It's broadly a group of people who are related to each other.
Right.
And then you look back at the etymology of the word family, and it has to do with the people of the household being enslaved to the master of the household. So it's like it has its roots in slavery and like in Latin. And I think that's fascinating when you look at the descendants of of the Western world, basically, and how the family unit is viewed and how patriarchy is infused into the concept of family. And so it transforms the way that I use that word when I just knowing that background. I can't unsee the long history of the word. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so when you were talking earlier too about sort of inventing words, I'm curious about when you invent a word, you're stamping the etymology of that new word right here and now. And do you feel that when you make these assemblages that you're sort of breaking apart different pieces of things and assembling, like crafting a new thing that will have its own history?
Right. I think for me, words sometimes have their own meaning, and sometimes they're just part of a larger whole. Kind of like in music, how like one note can sound completely different depending on where you put it in a specific part of a specific melody, and that's kind of how I see it. Making up words sometimes is more of, sometimes it's about giving them new meaning, sometimes it's about the way they sound, sometimes it's more about the way they are in relation to another word. So it's very much, there's a lot of putting them together because of how they sound, because of what they can bring as a whole, rather than just the transformation for transformations.
I love that as a concept, because it almost treats words as living things as well, and which they kind of are. They are electrical impulses that live inside all of our brains simultaneously, which is its own form of magic in a way. Speaking of witches, but yeah, actually speaking of witches, can we talk a little bit about poems as spells or as magical objects as well, and the way that like you mentioned just now, the right placement of a word creates intonations, and it can be about the way it sounds and how that sound invokes feeling as much as the actual meanings of the words do.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a big part of this whole collection was about words and like sentences as spells and as kind of like incantations in a way. Sometimes, like, especially prose poems, that can be very much about like the way they look and the way they roll off the tongue, no punctuation and everything. Definitely can sound like almost like an incantation in some sense. But I think that in general, I wrote this collection as like the poems themselves as spells, not even just the word, but the poems themselves as sort of a way to bring back the past or to kill the past or to revisit, I guess, something. And then there's a poem in there that's about like the future and thinking about something that hasn't happened yet, that may happen, but that I'm invoking in that sense through the words.
That makes a lot of sense, and you can definitely feel it, especially in your delivery of your own voice of the poems. And I think it's always really fascinating to me the way that works, because I've always thought very similarly about the use of words in general and the way that we arrange them as just an act of magic. Right. Of course, there's science and history to it as well, but just I can invoke an image inside of your mind, a place that can not be accessed in any other way, by arranging sounds. And I think that's beautiful and wonderful. So what I would like is, I know you had a couple more. I don't know if you wanted to read more poems right now, or if you want to move to the.
Sure, I can read the last one.
All right, that's a
this one's called A Case Against Your Generous Insistence on Inviting Me. Tugging on the rope to imposter's boat and asking for that little bit of extra room inside, it's the stuff of exhaustion, dreams, and collapses. The people will play act and they'll oblige and they'll x-ray and decipher me as soon as I turn. Even the cat will sense the weirdness vibes and will remove his coolness. I am not a crown glass frame. I can't afford any more singes at the back of my head where my eyes are. They'll dance around the no-no zone all evening, asking with the absence of the actual asking. Why my foot bites look the way they do, why I grip them like too hard, why I swirl the dead weight through the rest. And you, by benevolent affection, will only center said no-no even. Yes, you mean well. Most days I think I do too. But your kindness is trouble wrapped in trouble. And though you never voice it, at this point, your wariness matching only mine will be apparent in the humid tint of your fingertips tapping fingertips. Next we'll move on to films, and this will really be it. I'll say you guys choose. You'll insist say on special occasion, singling out without word, occasion, my foreignness. And you and yours will morph those into a flock of restless spirits. I thought you liked this one. I thought you liked this one. But every choice will be thin ice. Cinephile, yes, but faced with mindful options. This one on fashion, my mentioned bodies, mentioned. This tragic comedy will make the trauma of that individual. This documentary will confront your people with their white privilege. And though I do this dance on the regular, with you watching, plus reflective, it'll hit very different. So I'll settle on something stupid we'll all hate, but that one hate is back in time. And every time I'll go outside to get up some composure, you'll clearly have to like you follow. We'll all go the distance between your balcony and the concrete underneath. We'll haha and temper the most inside joke. You, no funny business. Me, wasn't thinking about it. And calling it a night, though early, will kill both of the deliverance and the defeat. You love me, but I ruined things. Let's not like each other less.
One was too relatable. I read this poem and I don't like it. No, but I just love the humanness of it. It's very much a situation anyone of us could have been in.
Yeah.
Maybe any one of us
Yeah.
here. But it also creates like a beauty and grace in this kind of everyday human moment of like anxiety and
Yeah.
disconnection. You know, like, it's like
I don't want to be here.
I want to be here, you know.
Yeah.
But also it's just like the weird razor balance of I don't want to be here, but I'm here.
And now I have to be.
And now,
Nice about it.
yeah, I think that it really hit the nail on the head with that feeling, which is, in my opinion, a great skill of yours and your work.
Thank you.
So thank you again for sharing that. Snaps again. We'll take this moment to open up to the audience for questions if you all have any. Also, for those of you watching from home, if you have a question, you can type it in the comment in the live stream. I saw a hand almost go up just now.
I have a bunch, but not that many. But I'll ask this one, which is kind of I mean, the bad questions, but I continue to counter people who do things differently from the norm or the current established way of doing things, in the way that you express like poetry and like writing with more flow or freedom. Do you believe that breaking form and holding space for those who go against what is taught is valuable, or if everyone should have a similar starting point or like a base, like, you know, poetry is this, and then you do what you want? It reminds me of like jazz, for example, or I guess like, you know, like, but there's those that just pick up an instrument and play, and then they're, you know, given so much respect. And, so, yeah, what is your view on all of that?
Well, I mean, there's this whole thing about know the rules so you can break the rules, and I do believe in that to a certain extent, in the sense that having a sort of basis gives you something to go off. But I'm also very like anti, has to be like academic, has to be. So I think that everybody should definitely come from a place of like where they come. Some people never get an MFA, never go to poetry school, and they still write beautiful and amazing things. And so I feel like if it's inside of you, the best thing to do is just read a lot, write a lot, and that's how you find your own. Not necessarily by learning the way it's supposed to be done.
Like, should I keep going?
No, I have, As an artist, how do you deal with burnout?
Oh, that's a
Loaded question, sorry.
That's, yeah. I think that when there's a momentum, it's like I follow it, and then when it's not there, I feel like part of something I've learned recently for myself at least is that the creative rest is also part of the process. And like currently right now, I haven't written anything in like almost 4 or 5 months, and it's part of a burnout element, but it's also part of just giving yourself the rest, and your brain is so working.
Yeah, as an artist who recently experienced a pretty severe burnout I'm a musician. At the beginning of this year, I definitely had to say like,
A lot of
yeah, I am burnt out. I'm gonna sleep.
Yeah.
And I did 6 months.
Yeah, but then you find your way back at some point when you get to yourself, because resisting it is not a good way to go.
Seems like it only prolongs it really. The more you resist the need to rest, the more the body's like, well, I've got a
I'm
lesson
sure
for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, do you have a favorite prose or a favorite genre that you prefer to write in? Like you alluded to like nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and then like how do you move between having the ability to do all of those? I think you might have another. I haven't read like the full background. Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, do you have a favorite, and then what do you like about each of those, and what do you like doing more?
I think because I love writing so much that I just love everything about it. But I definitely had different phases, and each of them have taught me different things. Like I got into writing with a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and that's kind of, I'm always going to feel fondly towards that because that's kind of what I started doing for a long time. And then nonfiction, I find, is where I'm most comfortable because it's kind of bridging the gap between all these different things. It can be more on the creative elements, so it's closer to fiction. It can be loose and kind of free, kind of like poetry. It can be a gateway to music, something like that. But then poetry is obviously something that I feel very like a lot of affection for as well. But when I'm feeling like I need to write, I don't always go into it thinking I need to write a piece of fiction. I need to write a piece of. I just need to write, and as I'm doing it, it takes form. And kind of
And I'm curious too, because what you're talking about is just kind of like sitting and then the words start flowing out. Do you ever find yourself, compelled to write, and then you sit down and the words don't flow? Like, what is that? I don't want to call it writer's block necessarily, but
yeah.
Just the discrepancy between the feeling of I need to write and the words just not appearing. Kind of how does that feel, and what do you do when that happens?
Yeah, it's not a good feeling. But usually the question that I start asking myself is this supposed to be a written piece? Because sometimes when I'm trying to write, I want to write. Most of the time it's just I have a feeling of like creative impulse. And sometimes that becomes like a drawing, or it becomes like a song, or it becomes just a piece of music or something. So it's something I've learned to do, definitely, is just to examine that when it's not coming, maybe it's not meant to be a right piece of writing.
Yeah, that never occurred to me, and maybe I'm secretly asking this question to get myself to write a bit more, but it never occurred to me that is kind of the solution, maybe not solution, but the question to ask yourself, like, is this something that needs to be written at all?
Exactly.
Could it be a song? Could it be a painting? Could it be a run in the park? It's like some kind of externalization of that creative energy for it.
Exactly.
I'm gonna put that one away. I'm gonna keep that. So as we kind of wrap up here, I'm curious about what do you hope? Who do you hope will be reading this book? And two, kind of how do you hope it will be received and absorbed? If you have any predisposition about that to begin with.
I mean, I hope a lot of people read this book. But I think a lot of what I read about is this feeling of like loneliness versus aloneness versus community versus family. And I think that there's a lot of, I know there are a lot of people who feel that way of I don't belong anywhere and this world is not meant for me. And I guess that's who I want to be reading this book and to be hearing these words that you do belong anywhere, even if it's just by your own lonely island, and to examine kind of what it means to be lonely versus what it means to be alone. I think a lot of people think about that, and I hope that this reaches those people, especially.
Thank you.
Here's one more question. I have this question. I think a question in the comments is a very similar to it. But you said you were somebody mentioned you were trilingual, so that's French, English, and
Wolof, which is Senegalese. That
ooh, what language do you feel most comfortable expressing emotions in? Which is very similar to another ones in the comment.
I would say like negative feelings come out better in French. Definitely, there's a lot of depth there that I can explore, but I find that sometimes it's just a mix of both. And when I'm with like, my siblings, we kind of it's easier to talk in that way than to confine myself to one language. Yeah,
So it makes a lot for you.
it's a bit.
Speaking of art, questions in the comments here.
Oh, we've got a lot of just really beautiful hearts and claps. And then, similar question is, what's your favorite to write in? And then the emotions question was the second part of the question as well.
To add on to that, do you think in one language over the other? Like I don't know, some people are like, oh, they're thinking in French and speaking like that. So what is there needed like when you're thinking or dreaming, like what language do you?
I think in French and then I speak English is the best way to do it.
Do you feel like that constant translation that's going on affects the way that you communicate and like the way that you think about communicating with others and connecting with other people, where there's always an extra thing happening when you form words to say to another person, for example. Do you think that has an effect, or have you perceived that you think differently about communicating because of it?
I definitely like sometimes construct the sentences in my head in a different language, so that I'm always thinking like, am I making sense and am I coming through clearly? And that's something that, well, I don't have that hang up anymore. But I mean, when I was a lot younger, I was definitely always paranoid about am I expressing myself as clearly as I want to be? Because it sometimes hinders actually having a lot in there is actually the opposite of being able to speak a lot of different.
Makes sense. Well, thank you so much again for this incredible reading and event. I really appreciate your book. For those of you watching from home, you can order a copy of Burn the Witch at lostcitybookstore.com or at www.amartine.com. Where else can we keep up with you? You have social media, upcoming events, where you might be speaking with them.
I used to have a Twitter, but then I shut it down. Yeah. I have Instagram, which is I should probably write it down.
Yeah. We'll post this in the comments for you all. On Instagram. I was like, that's great.
I will see work.
Okay. Well, thanks again so much. I thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone feel free to stick around and chat some more if you like. I'm gonna put our music back on.
And if you want to order your copy of the book, you can do so at the front desk downstairs. They'll make an order for you.